Alrighty, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Illinois Tech CyberHawks Cyber Defense Bootcamp. Thank you all for joining us today. Today is going to be session 0. So we're going to be doing an introduction to the course in general, or the topics that we're going to be covering over the course of these seminars, followed by a discussion regarding the learning environment that we have, and then an introduction to the command line. So that's what we'll be working on today. So who are we? So we are the Illinois Tech CyberHawks. We are Illinois Tech's cybersecurity student organization. If this is your first time engaging with us or watching any of our videos, welcome. We try our best to make everything as accessible as possible, as many people can get some hands-on cybersecurity skills on their own end. Some of what we do is we primarily compete in competitions and host hands-on seminars, just like this. So in the past, we were the national champions in 2022 with the NCAA Cyber Games National Champions. We returned again last year. We came third last year. We also do the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition and the Department of Energy's Cyber Force Competition as well. Anybody is welcome to join as long as you're an Illinois Tech student. But we also allow people to kind of come around our Discord server as well if you're not from IIT or if you've graduated as well. So we try to kind of leave it a little bit open so that people can kind of experience and share their knowledge between everybody. Who am I? So I'm David Arnold. I'm a PhD student in computer engineering at Illinois Institute of Technology. I am the founder and president of the Illinois Tech CyberHawks. We founded the organization way back in fall of 2018, so it's been a fun yet challenging grind. So we've been kind of working on kind of building everything up. We started with practically nothing. When we went back and we did the Cyber Force competition in CCDC in 2019, we just got smoked. So we've come a long way. Obviously, last year or 2 years ago, we won the national championships for the NCAA Cyber Games. So we've grown quite a lot from that humble beginning. But in addition to those roles, I'm also the co-instructor for ECE 222, which is our introduction to cybersecurity engineering. It's I tried to make it a pretty broad course. So we cover both offense and defense. So kind of give everyone kind of two perspectives on kind of where to go at cybersecurity at. So it's really meant to be a basic introduction to the field, kind of get you started and get you going with that. At least in terms of the goals of this boot camp. So this is primarily to help out people who have never done anything with cybersecurity before. They're not entirely sure to where to start. They don't know what skills they might need to pick up. For people who are a little bit more advanced, this could be useful as sort of a refresher. And then ultimately, if you're interested in doing any sort of our cybersecurity competition, if you're interested in being on any of our teams, this is a great place to get started so that you have an idea, at least in terms of how do we operate, what are the things that we're looking for, and how do we operate on that level. Some of the stuff today, we're going to be going to the Linux command line. That's a fairly fundamental thing that you're going to need if you're ever going to be doing anything with cybersecurity. We're not really going to cover much with Windows in this seminar series. The main reason for that is it's a whole nother beast entirely. So that might be something that we come up with in the future. Maybe we'll do a summer thing as well. But at the very least, we'll be focusing on the Linux command line. I find it a little bit more intuitive. Tomorrow, we'll be going through the basics of networking. So we'll be talking about how do we set up a very simple network. We'll be doing a little bit in terms of setting up a simple CentOS router so that you can kind of get a better understanding of how are threats acting within the internal side of my network, and then how may they act if they're coming from an external point of view. We'll take a look at things from the red team perspective, so some offensive security, and then, of course, we'll be doing some defensive stuff for the last 3 lectures. This is geared towards cyber defense competitions, so there are going to be some defense topics, or defense tactics, I should say, that are geared more towards how do you root out the bad guy if they're already on the machine. So there's a little bit less in terms of we're not necessarily looking at application level. So if there's some sort of vulnerability on, say, the website, and there's some way that they can get in through there, we're not really going to be focused on that as much, although that is a very important part. We just wanted to focus on, hey, if you're given something from a defense competition perspective, they've done a lot to the machine already just to kind of make it easier for themselves, of course, during the competition. So we're going to look at how do you find those people. They are applicable to the real world. So it's looking at how do you find misconfigurations, how do you find things that maybe someone was trying to take the easy road and they opened it up from that perspective. Give me one sec. Okay, cool. All righty. So at least, oh, I don't know if my headphones went out. Okay. So in terms of the actual course, I've broken this down into 7 specific sessions. So we have session 0, which is going to be how to use the learning environment and the command line. Session 1, which is going to be tomorrow, is going to be computer networking. So we're going to take a look at that on a CentOS machine, an Ubuntu machine, and a Debian machine. So we're going to set up some basic static IP addresses. We're going to figure out how do we connect that to each other, how do we connect that to the gateway, and how do we go on from there. Session 2, which is going to be on Thursday, is we're going to look at common ports and services. So we're going to take a look at, we're going to install SSH, which is secure shell. So that's how you're going to remotely connect to something. We'll look at DNS, domain name service. How can you kind of resolve a domain name into something else? And then we'll also look at how do you set up HTTP. So you're going to set up a very basic website. We're not going to do anything fancy. So we're not really going to go very far in HTML. We're just going to set up a simple website. It's just going to be there. It's going to exist, and we'll have some fun with it. Then we'll take a look at things from the red team perspective. We'll take a look at how do you set up firewalls. So a very basic defense mechanism. It's not the thing that you should entirely hide behind. It's just something that, especially within a competition perspective, you want to set up because that'll allow you to give yourself some more time when dealing with the red team. Then we'll do some hardening and then incident response. So kind of rounding things out some more. I've put some asterisks next to session 3 and next to session 4. The reason that I've done that is that those are scheduled to happen next week. I've got a fairly busy schedule next week, so there's a possibility that that'll all get crammed into the following week. So that's just as a quick note there. So just be on the lookout for emails, Discord messages regarding whether or not something is going to happen regarding that. But for now, those I believe are going to take place. I want to say one of them was Wednesday and the other one may be Friday. I don't remember. So just take a look at this schedule and keep an eye on that. All right. So at least in terms of kind of how these sessions are going to be structured, each session is going to be scheduled for approximately 3 hours, and the recording is going to be approximately for 2 hours. So that what that essentially is going to mean is we're going to have approximately 2 hours of lecture and then about 1 hour or so of Q&A and break. So for example, today we're going to try and shoot for from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. I'll be kind of explaining and talking through things. From 2 to 2:30, we'll do a Q&A, and then from 2:30 to 3:30, we'll do lecture. I'll cut down on the Q&A and break kind of depending. For the people who are watching at home as part of the recorded part, you won't see that. That'll just kind of poof, and we're done with the break. But I will bring up anything that people may have brought up in the course of that Q&A structure. I've kind of talked to this about the people who are here via the Zoom, but please hold all questions until we reach those Q&A times, just so that we kind of move through things relatively cleanly. My recommendations for success, we kind of found this while I was working through ECE 222 in the spring, is that I highly recommend kind of watching the videos twice. So the first time that you do it, take some notes, mark some things down, maybe write down a command or two. But then on the second one, run through it. So we're going to be doing a lot of stuff that's hands-on keyboards. If you're trying to follow along directly, sometimes it doesn't exactly directly connect until you kind of ingrain at least some of the instruction a bit more. I do highly recommend practicing. So that's the main reason as to why we have the learning environment, is that gives us a fairly flexible and very easy way that we can access and do a whole bunch of stuff at a pretty large scale. And so forth. And then, of course, try things out. So if you're unsure of how to do something, play around with it. Generally speaking, I'm okay if you completely trash the machine accidentally. I can quickly press a button and then you're wiped, you're set back to the beginning. Granted, you'll have to do a little bit of work to get back to where you were, but at the very least, it gives you a chance to kind of play around and test different things. I do have 2 course links. So we do have a YouTube channel and a course repo. So I will go ahead and I will copy those real quick, and I will show you very quickly what is going on with both of those. So let me go ahead and quickly pop that open. So we do have a few links here. So we have the CyberHawks YouTube channel. So we have this here. I'll go ahead and pull that up out here. We post really fairly infrequently, to be honest. We're trying to improve that. Although over the course of the fall semester, we did a new seminar series called the Illinois Tech Zero to Hero seminar series. So we had 6 ones from that. So we had Ben DePotter and then Nick Quigley. They did an awesome job covering a few different introductory stuff. John Ford also posts things occasionally regarding the red teaming, the offensive side of things. We also have instructions if you ever want to set up, if you happen to have a server handy, or if you're from another institution and you want to set up something kind of similar to what we're using with Proxmox here, and you want to have an automated, to some extent, to creating and setting up a large number of users, we have instructions, at least in terms of how to set up our Proxmox setup there. So thanks to John Ford for putting that sort of content together. The other link that I have here is our course repo. So if I go ahead and pull that out, the course repo. So I've created a Google Drive through the CyberHawks account, where you can find both the, if you are part of our block A and you already have access to the learning environment, you'll already have access to this learning guide via the email, but I have this uploaded here to Google Drive as well, just so that you have that. Of course, it's going to be slow in showing you the sample there, but I've also uploaded, or will be uploading, all the slides there as well. So you'll be able to access that if you want access to all that. That'll be there, and you'll be able to view that. So that's just as a note there, is that we have those resources that will be available there. All right, so go ahead and throw this to the side now. Alrighty, so next I have just an introduction to the Bootcamp learning environment. If you're watching this from YouTube and you don't have access to it, so let's say that you're outside of Illinois Tech and you're just kind of watching this along to get some of the other skills that we're teaching here, I'll go ahead and leave a timestamp on the screen on how to view that information, or not how to view, but to skip quite right ahead to the command line introduction. All right, so at least in terms of the Bootcamp learning environment, this is the general structure of kind of what you'll be working with over the course. There are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 machines that you'll be working with. We have 2 Kali Linux machines. We have one that's going to be sitting on the, I call it the outside or the external network, and then one that's going to be sitting on the inside or the internal network. Those will allow you to get kind of a good perspective in terms of, okay, if somebody were to breach and they were to get into my network, what could they do from there? So that's why we have those 2 Kali Linux machines. We have a CentOS router machine, which is going to be handling that, I guess I wouldn't say tunnel, but it'll serve as a gateway for the internal machines so that they can access the rest of the internet. We have another CentOS machine, which is going to be our website. We're going to be hosting a simple website there. We'll have a Ubuntu machine, which is going to be an FTP and SSH server. And then finally, we have a Debian machine, which is going to be a DNS server. So a fairly simple setup. You can get a lot bigger with this. Any sort of enterprise system, you'll have a lot more. You'll have more Windows machines. You may have an Active Directory that you're setting up here. But at the very least, this gives you kind of a taste. It gets you kind of your feet wet a little bit in terms of working with a few of these concepts. How do you set up your IP addresses? How does DNS work within that internal infrastructure? How does the website function? Where are logs and those sort of things for those simple applications? So that's the main goal, at least here. So it gives you quite a few things to work around. It allows you to get an idea of what are some of the differences between each of the Linux distributions. So there's a bunch of them, and it's an open platform, so anybody could create their own distribution. And so you have a lot of them that you can kind of play around with. In order to get there, we do have a website. Unfortunately, we are currently hosting this with a self-signed certificate. So essentially what that means is that whenever you attempt to go to the website, so if I go ahead and head there, if I go ahead and go there, it won't give, the browser would and should give you this warning that the connection is not private. Essentially, because we're signing the certificate, it can't ascertain who actually what the server is. But here we go. This is the web page. As I mentioned, it'll say connection is not private, and so you are able to skip that. So we're not asking for any sort of private information. The content itself is safe. So that's, you can go ahead and skip into the login page. Let us know if you don't see this. But you can go ahead and log in. It is case sensitive. So what I've done is we ended up having about 53 people sign up. So it was a lot more than what we were expecting. So we ended up having to spin up a new server. So if you're a part of Block A, you should already have your credentials to access it. I'm hoping to have Block B set up and ready to go by Friday. So that's the main thing there. It is case sensitive. So we can go ahead and log in. If it says no valid subscription, that's okay. Just go ahead and click OK, and you can go from there. And you'll be greeted with something like this. So you'll have a data center, you'll have the general information here. So in this case, we have the 6 machines that we're going to be working with. If you're part of Block A, so the people who got their credentials today, you'll be as part of EC 2224. And if you are part of Block B, you're going to be thrown onto 2223. So that's the main thing. In order to get this pop down, just double click on the server name. So here we go. I have the servers here. Today, we're just going to be doing the CentOS router. Let's see. Should I just come and attend? Okay, somebody asked whether or not they should just attend tomorrow. You can, although we're still going to be doing some of the command line stuff a little bit later. So if you've never done anything with the command line before, I highly recommend sticking around and just kind of watching through as we do the remainder. So in order to access one of the machines, what we're going to go ahead and do is I can double click on the server name. So in this case, I want to work with the Cent router. So I'll go ahead and double click on it and it'll go ahead and be good to go. Alternatively, I can look at it in this windowed view here. I don't recommend doing that. It makes it fairly hard to view. I can also click up here, the console up here. So those are just a few different ways in which you can access those machines and how you can get that going there. So we'll go ahead and move on. Alrighty. Cool. So after that, so again, we're planning on updating the self-signed certificate in the spring. Go ahead and log in. Make sure, that's one thing I forgot to mention, make sure that the realm is set to Proxmox. Occasionally people get set automatically to root, and no, it's Linux, I think. And that's not the correct one. So you want to make sure that you're Proxmox VE, and you'll give the username and password. And then I went over these. So the slides are mainly here just to kind of after the fact, if you're kind of looking at or looking at just the slides and you're kind of looking at that. Alrighty, so we have 6 machines. So you have the router, the 2 Kali machines, another Cent machine, and then the Ubuntu and Debian machine. You can just double click on the machine and it'll pop out for you. If you have one thing that we used to have problems with was if somebody was on, let's say, a laptop and they went to this full screen mode and it kind of cropped some of it and there was a scroll bar on the side here. It doesn't show up on at least this computer. To fix that, just go over here, click on the pull-out tab, go to settings, and then turn on local scaling. And it will update it. So actually that made it, let's see, is that bigger? Yeah, that's a little bit bigger for the stream here. So that's how you'll make it where it fits your screen properly. So then the next question was, I'm sorry, last question. No, the exact same lecture will not be held tomorrow. Tomorrow will be intro to networking. So next we have alrighty. So that ends the introduction to the learning environment. I'll quickly go through everything real quick again. So we went ahead and logged in. Unfortunately, like I said, it's a self-signed certificate. So you do have to kind of go past the security warnings there, unfortunately. And then after you log in with the credentials that we give you, we'll go ahead and see the data center here. If you're in Block A, you're going to be 2224. And if you're in Block B, you'll be 2223. So those are how those two are going to work. To access the machines, you just double click on the server that you have. and then you could just click between them. It'll give you just the windowed one here. You can pull that out either by clicking console up here or by double clicking on the server. So that's how that's going to work. You don't have any other permissions on here. I don't even think you have permissions to make snapshots. So that's just as a note there. So just be aware of that. Alrighty. So welcome back to anybody who went ahead and skipped ahead of the virtual learning environment. So now we're going to talk through some basic command line stuff. So the command line is how we're able to do a lot of higher order functions within Linux. So nowadays there are a lot of graphical user interface for Linux. So if you've ever worked with Ubuntu, a lot of the times you'll have a desktop that you'll work in. Other ones also have desktops where you can get a lot of work done. There's kind of what you think of with a Windows machine if your main one is Windows, or if you're on a Mac, where you can go into settings and change things there. But we can bring up what's known as the command line to have more control over some of the different things that we're gonna be doing. And in a lot of cases, when we're in some sort of a production environment where we have a whole bunch of servers, we're able to then, we have direct command line access to any of the tools, and it'll only be a command line. So with these servers, let's say that we're running a website, practically speaking, we don't really need to have the GUI on or available. We just need to be able to run commands on there. If you're running the GUI, it'll take up RAM, it'll take up CPU. And so you'll be kind of wasting resources there that could be used for responding to requests from clients. So that's kind of why we mainly use the command line, at least in that sense. A lot of our tools and stuff, when we take a look at it from the red team's perspective, next week when we're talking through some of the stuff from there, is they're going to use a lot of the command line to actually run those tools as well. So that's kind of a good primer, a good place to start within cybersecurity there. So some command line basics. So we have a few different Linux distributions. So I have just some basic background information here about just kind of how Linux got started. There's I don't even know how many Linux distributions there are today. So you have Debian, Fedora, CentOS, Ubuntu. It's just all an untold number of them. And at least as part of this series, we'll be looking through 3 of them. We'll be looking through Ubuntu, CentOS, and Debian. And there'll be some slight differences between those 3. Primarily, at least the most glaring is going to be how we set up the network interfaces. So we're going to use something completely different, a different service for each of them, a different way to set that up, and we'll be doing that tomorrow. CentOS uses a different package manager, so they use Yum, whereas Ubuntu, and I believe Debian does as well, they use apt for their package management. And so we'll take a look at that when we're setting things up on Thursday with common ports and services when we install SSH, HTTP, and then DNS. So we'll take a look at a few of those when we're getting there. So as we go through the course, it'll become a little bit more apparent in terms of what some of the differences are. But at the very least, generally speaking, they're all based on the simple Linux, the Linux idea. It's based on Unix, and so a lot of it is going to be very familiar. It's going to be very similar throughout all of those, but there are some slight differences that you have to get used to. At least in terms of running commands, so we can kind of break, at least in terms of how I break things down, is I break commands down into 3 segments. So I have the actual command, I have the flags that are associated with it, and then the argument. So the command is the actual tool, software, application program that we want to run as part of whatever we're working on. The flags are mostly optional settings that can fine-tune the command. A lot of times it's required in some instances to get a certain effect to happen, so it's not unexpected to have those. And then we have the argument, which at least in like a cybersecurity sense, a lot of the times is generally the target that we're working with. So that could be if we're looking at if we're running, let's say, a scan. And so in this case, we have an Nmap scan. So this is what we're going to be using next week, at least in terms of to identify what potential attacks that we could run on the machine. We're going to be doing Nmap scans is the actual command that I'm going to be running. The argument is going to be the machine that we're trying to target. So in this case, we have an IP address here, 192.168.2.2. So that's just as an example there. And then we have the flags. So those are some fine-tuned ones. So if I break down these ones specifically, so if I take a look here, is we have We have the P, which is the port. So in this case, we're looking at port 80. We want to do OS and then service enumeration. We want to find out as much as we can on this port 80, and then the ping skip. So we'll cover that a little bit more in depth later. So those are just some examples in terms of what a command looks like. In terms of getting help, so anytime that we're doing anything with the command line or anything in here, you can look for what's known as a manual page. So a man page, you can run man and then the name of the command that you want to take a look at, and it'll give you a description of what the command is and all the different flags that you can run with it. So that's very helpful. Occasionally, you'll also get help flags. So if you put in -h or --help, sometimes that helps too. Sometimes that'll print out something very similar to the man page. And then, funnily enough, a lot of the times we can actually get additional information on how to run it correctly is if you use the command improperly. So if you're using it incorrectly, a lot of the times the developer will kind of throw you a bone a little bit and be like, oh, hey, I see you're trying to use this, but you're not giving the right flags, you're not giving the right arguments here. Here's how you're supposed to do that. So that's just as a sample there. So if we're ready to go ahead and I bring up a sample here. So I'm on my CentOS machine. With the CentOS machine and most of the machines here, the credentials are root and then root. So very insecure. Obviously, just the same name, root, as we'll kind of see throughout the rest of the series, is that's kind of your ultimate user. And if an attacker were to gain access to this, they have control over the entire machine. And so in this case, we've got the same credentials. We've got root and root, so that's really bad. Another one on this one is I have administrator, and his password is ABC123. Oops, I had an exclamation point. And there's no capitals. So at least if I were to write out the credentials for the root administrator, we have root is the user. So user equals root, and then the pass equals root. So that would be the other guy. And then the user for the other guy is administrator. And then the password is ABC123. So we wanted to do just simple ones just to make it easy for everybody to quickly log in and do stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and log back out. I'll go back to root. If you are familiar with some of these things, I would say we're going to do a lot of things with root in this course. That is, when you're doing anything out in the wild, you do want to learn to rely on root less. So we're using root just for simplicity. It allows us to very easily figure out how to get into things, how to very easily access and do different stuff. We don't really have to think about it too much, but sort of a stretch goal is to kind of lessen your usage of it. So if I could use more of an administrator account, or even if I could use a user account to do certain things, that's more preferred to using it. So you want to start to kind of wean yourself off of that a little bit. But at least for the purposes of this course, we're going to be using root pretty much exclusively just to make things easier and run through things quicker. So I've gone ahead, I've logged in with my root account. So one of the first things that we could do is we could use the ls command, which is list. All right, and actually I'm going to do man of ls. So list is ls, is it allows us to read the current directories. So here we go, the user command ls, we did a man page on it. We have different options. So in this case, we've got all our flags here. So we can do not ignore entry starting with a dot. We have different stuff here. If I press the enter key, it continues down the page, or if I use the arrow keys, that works too. So enter or arrow keys, that allows us to move up and down. And we see as much information as we may need. So if we're curious about, hey, can this command do a little bit more than what I was trying to do? That's basically what you can do here. And exit out, I press Q. I don't know if ls. So it looks like ls does not have, oh, it does have a help page. So in this case, if I do --help, it spits out something very similar to the man. So that's just as an example of how do you get help? How do you kind of explore and do a little bit more than maybe what you had done before, so that you're getting help. We could take a look at the Linux file system. So I'll show you through a little bit more of here as I start to get through a little more of the moving around and running around with different commands. But the general structure is it begins with this root directory. So if you see a slash, it's this this lovely root here. There's the root directory. And here's just a list of some common ones that you may find. There may be some differences, again, between distributions. Different distributions may have different things and different, I wouldn't say different places, but they may add or they may subtract different directories for different reasons. So some pretty important ones are the etc directory. So the etc directory has a whole bunch of configuration files. I'll go through a little bit that in a little bit because that's a fairly critical one. We have the hope directory. So that is where your users live. So in this case, we have that administrator user. So their home directory. You can kind of think of it as if I'm on like a Windows machine and I open up like the file explorer, that typically drops me in my home directory. So in this case, then I would see downloads. I would see documents. I would see maybe pictures or something of that nature. We can do some different things. There's also the root directory in a lot of cases. So there's a /, that's the root directory, and then there's a root directory called root. And that is basically the home directory of the root user. Typically that's protected. So you typically need to be the root user, or you need to be some sort of administrator with sudo privileges to get in there. But be sure to watch out for there's some slight differences. Not all of these are going to be everywhere. The highlighted ones are going to be everywhere. The bin, which is our binaries, we'll talk a little bit about that when we're talking about hardening, at least in terms of maybe the red team went in and they made a fake password binary, and they were using that to kind of figure out what your passwords were in secret. So that's just a general overview of the file system. As we go through the next few slides are going to be about how do you move around the file system. So you'll get a better idea, at least in terms of how that works through that. So first we have moving around. So a few commands that are really important is we have print working directory, or PWD. It prints the name of the current directory. We have list, or ls. It's going to give you the contents of that directory, and then change directory, or CD. And that's going to allow you to move between these directories. So if I go ahead and I pop back into here, another one that you'll see me use quite frequently is you'll see me use the clear command. So if I clear, it goes ahead and it wipes out the contents here, or not contents. It wipes out what it shows on the screen. So that's just as a sample there. If I want to use a previous command, I can use the up arrows. So if I go up one, you see the clear command again. I can use ls again, the man page, exit. So those are the commands that I ran, and so forth. So if I do a pwd, and as you can see on the left here, so we have root at localhost. So in this case, I believe it's placed me in the root directory. So if I do pwd, it says print working directory. And right now I'm in root, which, as I mentioned, is essentially the home directory for the root user. So I'm currently in pwd. If I were to do an ls command, so ls, we see there's some sort of configuration file that CentOS generated for us. If I were to do a cd, so with cd, if I want to go back a directory, I use cd and then ... And if I do a pwd, we see this /. So normally what will end up happening is if I ls again, and let's say I go into the home directory. So I have to go into home. It'll update here as well. So as you can see, it updates here. Whenever you see, I believe it's a tilde. Whenever you see this little tilde, that goes back to your home directory. So if I do cd tilde, it brings me back to my home. So if I do pwd, we're back in root. So I'm back there. If I go back to home, there we go. I'm in /home now. And I can do an ls. So let's go ahead and ls. We see the administrator user that I referenced before. So I go into administrator, pwd, home /administrator. So that's how we get started with that. If I do an ls, I don't believe I have anything. Yeah, there's nothing in this administrator directory currently. And so there's really not much we can do from there. So if I were to go around to other places, so let's say I want to go to etc directory. There's going to be a lot more stuff there. So as I mentioned, the etc directories are configuration files. So we'll find a whole bunch of stuff about different things. We'll find configuration files for different services that are on the machine. We also see different system configuration stuff. So there's what's known as the sudoers file. So those are our administrators on the computer. We can also see what's known as the password file. It's a little bit of a misnomer. It used to actually give the hash of the passwords from your users, but they realized that that was bad just to have lying out in the open. So they created a file called the shadow file. So we'll talk more about that later when we're doing some red teaming stuff. But we can view those. We can view those two files, and I'll go into how I was able to open that in a few minutes. But there's different very important files that are here in etc. And so forth. So now we head back. Additionally, on the list command, so if I were to go, let's go back to my root directory, and I do ls-l, I can find additional information regarding, for instance, the permissions on the file. I can find the owner, the group that the file are a part of. I can see when it was last edited. So there's some good information there. And the A flag allows us to see every file, regardless of whether it has the dot in it. What the dot is it's known as a hidden file. It's not. Is essentially if you see here. So if I do ls-l, or if I just do my ls, if I were to look here, I only get the anaconda. But if I did ls-la, I see all these files that start with a dot. So dot, dot, dot. The dot is just the current directory. Dot, dot is go back. Dot bash history. Dot bash logout. So additional information that is not immediately presented to the user. So we call it a hidden file. It's not super hidden. If you have the ls-a ability, if you just run that command, you see all the files in it. So it's not super hidden, but it can be a way if you want to quote unquote hide stuff. It's one thing that you can do. So just be on the lookout for those as you're going through stuff. As we can see here with the bash history. So if I press history, I can see every command that I've run previously. So that's just as a note there. Be aware of that. So let's say that like I need to like put in a password or something. So one thing that like I can think of right off the top of my head is if I were to do MySQL, like if I were to run like a MySQL server, so a database of some kind, and I do -p for password and I give my password. So in this case, the MySQL command isn't found. It'll still show up as part of the history file. So that's just as a quick note there. If you're doing things, make sure that you're doing it not as a command line password argument. So you want to make sure that you're doing that properly. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is relative versus absolute paths. So as you can kind of see here, I was slowly building up the name. So if I go back to right now I'm in my root directory. So if I go back, I go to home, I go to administrator, I do pwd, we see this home/administrator. I can go back to my root directory. I could use either a relative or an absolute path. So an absolute path is from the root directory, so the slash. So I could have said right off the bat, I could have said cd/home/administrator/home/administrator. I do pwd, I am in home/administrator. Alternatively, I could have used a relative path, and the relative path is based on my current location. So if I were to go back to my root directory, so if a pwd I'm in /root, I can head back and then I can head out to that administrator file. So I'm using the relative address from where I currently am to move over there. And we'll see later on when we're doing some red teaming stuff, how you can kind of use those relative addresses to your advantage to kind of mess around with some certain misconfigurations of certain things. So keep that in mind. The relative path obviously is for our convenience. If we wouldn't want to have to constantly go home administrator, especially if we landed in the administrator folder, we wouldn't want to have to constantly go back and go do that repeatedly. So that's just as a note there on the relative versus absolute path. Next, I'll talk a little bit about working with files. So this will be in terms of how do you read them, how do you modify them, how do you create them, how do you edit them. So this is just as a sample here. So the one that we'll use most is concatenate or cat. So if I do cat and then the file name, it will print the file out to the screen. You can combine multiple files together. So you can put multiple ones together. And then we can use head and tail as well. So if I go ahead and pull open my system, I'm going to head back to my root directory. Very quickly, I'm going to create two files. So nano temp.txt. So in this case, I'll just have, in this case, it's just going to be a sample. These are some names of my exec board members. I've got David Arnold, Cat Stevens, Ben. So there's some names here. So if I go ahead and use those, and we see the temp there, we'll create a second one. And in this case, it'll be maybe course name. So you see, so 222. That wouldn't be a good one because there would be several lines here. So we'll do like, I don't know, times of the year. Yeah, well, let's just do months. I don't know. We'll try January, and that's in winter. June, that's in summer. December, that's also in winter. So that's just as a sample goes. So very small files. So we see here temp2 temp.txt, and we can use cat. So I can do temp cat temp.txt, and we see the names that I put in there for that file. Or I can say temp2.txt, and we see the months and then the season that I assign with it. As I mentioned, we could put them together, and we get both of the files. So we see the names of my exec members for some of them, and then the month and the season. So I can push those two together and get some. I can also use the head command. So I could say head. Let's say I only want two of them. So head-n2. And we're only going to get those first two. And I can use tail to do the opposite. So I can go from the bottom. So you'll use that a few times. Let's say that we have a log file. And log files can get really long. And so one thing that you may try, of course, you'll have your own way of massaging that data to get exactly what you need right away. But this is another quick way. If I just want to look at the last few records of, okay, something happened within the last 2-3 minutes, it's going to be at the end of the log file. We know that for sure. So that's just a sample there of just very quickly moving through those. As a quick note, so if there's a file on my machine, so if I have this temp2 and this temp, I could use the tab on my keyboard to autocomplete according to what's there. So if I were to do cat, and if I tab right here, so I had TE, so TE tab, and then I tab, it automatically goes to temp because there's two files in there that start with temp. If I hit tab twice more, it goes ahead and lists out what my options are. So it's either going to be temp2 or temp. If I go ahead and put a period here and then hit tab again, or not tab, yeah, tab again, it will autocomplete it. So in this case, I do cat temp.tab, and then I print it out. So this just is a quick move around sort of thing that you can do there. We can also use what's known as a piping operator. So I have no idea what I don't even, it's just it's the piping operator to me. It's just the line on your keyboard. So if you have the I believe the /, if you have the / and you shift, you make that the capital, it is that letter there, I guess. And you can move output from one command to the next. So in this case, let's say I want to find some specific contents, I can use the grep command. So with this one, I can do cat temp.txt. I'm going to pipe it. It looks a little weird here. I don't know why. Let's see. Maybe if I clear. Yeah, on the CentOS machine, for some reason, it adds this little blank line in between this blank dot, or this black dot in the middle. I'm not entirely sure why it's doing that. So let's say I want to find any line that says David. So I do cat temp. I use my redirect operator here, and then I look for grep David. So this could be useful. Let's say that we have a log file that is a whole bunch of IP addresses, and I want to find activity associated with a specific one. So that would just be a sample there of how we would go about it, and we would do that. So and if I had done if with that temp.txt, let's say I add another David Arnold and another exact copy, we'll get both of them when we grep. So that's how you'd use that one. Some other ones that we could use here are, we could use cut. So it'll reformat it based on a given delimiter. So in this case, let's say, in this case, we have this space here. So if I do temp.txt, you should be able to also do it directly with the with just the cut command, I believe. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to redirect again. So cut, the delimiter in this case is going to be a space. The field in this case is, let's say I just want the first names. And in this case, so we did a cut. The delimiter in this case is a space. And the field you want is the first one. Alternatively, I could get the last names, so with a 2. So that's the cut command. That can be very useful, especially with different versions of kind of what you're looking at. So for instance, if I were to open up that etc password file again, we see that it's delimited by colons. So in this case, if I cat etc password and I cut it with colons instead, we can just get the usernames that are on the system. So that's an example there of how we would use that command. So next we have unique. So let's say, similarly with kind of what I was dealing with before, is let's say that we have something where we have multiple lines. Let's say we've got multiple versions of David in here. So cat temp.txt. And in this case, for some reason, I don't know why this one is very finicky. Let me see if I can. It's probably because the last line doesn't have a carriage return on it. It's probably why it's upset. Let's actually, you know what? Let's do cat temp.txt. We'll grep for David, and this should. Okay, that did not. Okay, so it's probably the carriage return then. So if I go ahead and my sticky keys. So if I go temp.txt, let me go ahead and add another line. So we have Lucas. Let's try that again. No, it's still being finicky. Normally what that command is doing, I'm sure I'm probably using that slightly incorrectly here. But that should only show, that should remove duplicates from the output. I don't know why that's having problems right now. It's just for some reason being a little finicky, but that's what you would do. You do there. We could use the more command as well. So it allows us to, I call it enter through the output. So again, if I have a very long output file, so super long, in this case, let's see, am I able to ping? Yeah, I am able to ping it. Do I double get on here? Curl? Okay, good. I have curl. So let's say I curl google.com. In this case, that's too short. So that's not going to work. So let's go ahead and grab the CyberHawks website. Okay, let's see. So this one, we added an SSL certificate to that website. So let me see, I have to do K to turn off certificate. So we see here, the website, at least with the HTML file that it spits back out, is super long. So it's this super long output here, and I just want to see it line by line. So here we have the top, and as I enter through it, it'll just continually go through each of the lines that I want there. So that would just be an example of more. I use that a lot. So if we see here on the command line, it's not as simple. So like, let's say I have a GUI and I'm using the command line on, let's say, so if I were to pull over to my Kali Linux machine here. So if I go ahead and log in, and for your heads up, the credentials for the Kali machines are just Kali and Kali. So Kali and Kali. There's no capitalizations anywhere in there. But at least on Kali Linux, So give it a second to load in here for us. We have a scroll bar. So if I do curl www or http cyberhawks.iit.edu. Go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, actually, I need to do this on the other one, so I don't want the internal one. As a quick note, oh, and then if you ever get something like this, just kind of click around until you find the login. It's just a weird bug right now with the Proxmox. I don't know what it is that causes that. But as a quick heads up, we are going to tomorrow, we're going to be learning how to set up the internal networking for these 4 machines. So internal Kali, CentWeb, Ubuntu Work, and Debian DNS. Right now, none of those machines have internal networks set up. And so you won't be able to access the internet on them. We're setting that up tomorrow. So that's just as a note there. So now if I do curl https cyberhawks.edu, we get that. We have a nice scroll bar. So we're able to scroll up and down. On other command lines, you typically don't get that. So that's just as a quick note there when you're working with certain things. Other fun commands is we have the awk command. It works kind of similar to what we were doing with cut. I believe this one works better when you have tabbing. So if you have different tabs in your output, it can get a little finicky with it. It can not like it as much. So if I do cap temp.txt, and I believe you could do other fun stuff with awk as well. Let me see. I'm pretty sure it's with quotes. So we have quotes. So we have, here we go. $1, close that out, and we work through that. So that could be an instance where you have tabbing, and sometimes tabs can make it a little awkward to work with. So that's where that comes into play. We can use tr and sed as well. So let's say I want to replace a given letter in the original with something new. So instance, let's say I have cat temp.txt, tr, let's say I want to do, instead of the spaces, I want commas. So as you can see here, we have replaced all of the spaces with commas. And I can further, if I use that same command again, and I do, if I do cut, I could use the same thing. I can kind of functionally push them. I can combine multiple piping operations together. So as you can see here, what I did is I opened up the file, I replaced all of these spaces with commas, and then I delimited those based on where the commas were. So kind of silly. Normally you just do the cut with the space instead, and then just go from there. But at least in our case, we've gone ahead and done it with the comma. And then the last one is sed. So if I cat temp.txt and I do sed, what sed is going to do is it's going to replace a string. So let me see. Yeah. So S. So S, and let's say I want to remove pretend David with Mr. And then there we go. Oops. I missed that one. Let's see. Oh, I forgot the extra slash. So yeah. And I spelled temp wrong. There we go. Temp. And there we go. So instead of David Arnold, it is Mr. Arnold. So that's just as a sample there. So sed is actually really, really useful in a lot of cases. So let's say that we have especially with DNS. So when we take a look at the DNS stuff, we're going to have a lot of instances where they'll often give you like a sample to work off of. So you'll install the bind DNS server and it'll give you a sample of what you're supposed to be working with. And then it will, you can use the sed command just to replace things in there. And it's much easier than having to go into the file and edit it and play around. So we've reached 2 o'clock. So I'm going to go ahead and take our first break here. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording here. Let's see. Alrighty, welcome back, everybody. So we're back from that little break. I went ahead and I did post the YouTube and Google Drive links in the Zoom chat, but for the people on YouTube, that'll be posted in the video description. So that's just as a quick note there. Alrighty, so before we entered the break, we were looking at some additional piping operators. So how to move things from if you're, let's say that you're opening a file or you're taking a look at a given output, how could you kind of massage that a little bit and find some other stuff? So like I mentioned, we could use grep to take a look at individual desired output. So let's say that we have a log file and we want to figure out what the activity of a certain IP address would be. That would be one good way to do it. We can use cut to kind of break that down and look at it for specific, maybe it could be a column that we're taking a look at or a specific field that we want to find out more information about. Some additional ones that we might want to use is, let's say that we have something that is encoded. So in this case, temp txt, and we want to use base 64. So you may run into this from time to time. A lot of the times, at least in terms of my experience, sometimes stuff on websites, for whatever reason, is for a while they were using that. They were encoding the user data before they were putting their tokens together. For a while they were doing that. So we can convert that into base 64, and we can also decode that from base 64. We can get it right back. So if you have a hex string or a base 64 string and you want to get it back as a decoded ASCII version, you just use base 64 and then -d. So that would be an example there. Another thing we may want to do is we may want to use the redirection operator. So let's say that we made that adjustment. So let's say that we did we manipulated it so that it no longer used spaces, but rather used commas. And I'd use the caret here to push it out to a new file. So temp3. And if I open up temp3, we have, and in this case, I accidentally put too much. So I did not mean to use cut there. I just wanted to redirect it. So if I open it up now it's everything where instead of spaces, we have these commas here. So that's just as a sample there in terms of some of the stuff that we can do with some of those redirect with some of the other pipes. So if I go back, other stuff we can do is we can move and then copy and remove them. I personally use move a lot more for like renaming something. So you can use move to move something into a different directory, and that's what it's supposed to be used for. I typically find myself just kind of renaming stuff with it. So let's say I want to, we'll start with copy or CP. So we'll copy temp.txt into temp4.txt. If I go ahead and open up temp4.txt, it's the same file that we've been working with. And then I'll move that. So let's say I'll move temp4.txt, and we'll move it to home/administrator. In this case, you have to give the full name that you want. So in this case, I could either rename it as temp4.txt, or in this case, I could even say temp.txt. And if I were to then open up cat home administrator, and that's that same file that we would work. But we can also remove stuff. So if I do rm home administrator, yes, in this case, it's asking me to confirm. So I can go ahead and do that. And if I try to open it, it'll say that it doesn't exist anymore. So that would be an example there. If I have a directory that I want to remove, so let's go ahead and create one. So I can use the make directory command. So mkdir, make directory, temp directory. If we do an ls here, we see it's highlighted in blue here. So if I head on into it, it's empty. I could use rmdir to get rid of it. So if I read it, it's gone. So I'll go ahead and make it again. So we'll make it. But I can also use rm.rf on temp directory if there's stuff in it. So I'll go ahead and make it again. I'll move temp3 into temp directory. I think there's no temp3. Let's see, so move. See, I spelled something wrong here. Oh, there's no root. It's not in root. There we go. So if I go into temp directory, and I just have temp.txt. So in this case, if I were to try and do, it'll say it's not empty. But to override that, I would just use temp. Normally you should, honestly, you should slowly clean it out, make sure you're not deleting anything. But I can do rm-rf on the directory name. Be careful, don't do like rm-rf on the root directory. If you do that, you're wiping out the entire file system. So I don't recommend doing that. It'll pretty much wipe you out. We can also edit and modify files with a few commands. So we can use the touch command. So touch just creates a temporary, and not temporary, but it just creates an empty file. So if I do touch empty.txt and I open up empty.txt, it's empty. There's nothing in there. So that's what touch will do for you. That's a good command sometimes when you just need to quickly do stuff. And then there's two main editors that we'll use. So we'll either use Vim or Nano. If you're a beginner, I highly recommend Nano. It's a lot easier to use. There's not as much with Vim. They designed it where you just be there's no need in this case with this command line. There's no cursor or anything like that. But it's designed for speed. So if I do Vim empty, and I'm more familiar with Vim, so you'll see me use Vim quite a bit. In order to do stuff, you'll have to press I for insert. So then I can say, hello world. Then you'll need to press escape, right quit, or right, quit. So that's very important. So if you end up in Vim, a lot of people get stuck and they don't know how to get out. To get out, you do Q. That's just how you do. To add in, press I, and it enters insert mode. To get out of insert mode, you press the escape button, quit, or right quit in this case. Nano is much easier. So Nano, empty. This one's much easier. I don't need to press I don't have to start, so I could just start typing. I can just start typing. Hooray. And then to write out things, you do Control O, hit enter, so you're giving the file name that you want to write to, and Control X to exit. So if I go back in there, if I could just, again, I can just type, still typing. I do Control O to write it out and Control X to exit. So again, that's how you use Nano. If you're completely new to the command line, you've never done it before, highly recommend Nano, and then slowly work your way towards Vim. Some additional stuff on Linux users. So root is our administrator account. We've been using that one for a majority of the day. It is the ultimate authority. I do recommend using it as little as possible, but for the course, for the purposes of streamlining the seminar series, we're going to go ahead and use root for most of this. And then as you kind of go through this, you should start to learn as to how to slowly start getting off of root. So that's what my recommendation would be. We can figure out what user we are with who am I. So one thing that we've noticed is, and this isn't unexpected. So a lot of times and we'll look at this next week when we're doing things from the red team perspective. But if we're looking at things from the red team perspective, a lot of times we end up with a shell that's not fully formed. So we don't see this nice root at localhost. So we have no idea what user we are. So a lot of times you'll see a who am I, that'll pop up, and that can sometimes clue you in that somebody has logged in maliciously somewhere. So sometimes you can see that. Additionally, we can create and manage users. So let's say I can either use add user or user add. This M here basically just creates a simple home directory. So if I go ahead and do my user add -m, we'll just create a quick David user. And we'll see here, David, as you note, it did not ask me for a password. So if I do password David, it'll ask me to put in a password. I'll just put David and David. So updated successfully. If I go ahead and exit, I can go ahead and log in as David. And it throws me in my home directory. So I'm in home/David. Additionally, I can change to the super user or switch to another one. So in this case, SU switches me over to another user. I do need to know their password unless I'm root. If I'm root, I'm able to just move over. It won't ask you any questions on that. But if I want to switch over to administrator, I need to have the administrator's password. So in this case, it's ABC123. And now I am the administrator. I can press exit to go back to David. If I do just Sue, that's trying to get up to root. And you'll note here, if I then use Sue with the root user, I could just freely, and I'm spelling that wrong, administrator. I can freely move around between my users. So now I'm back with we can remove accounts with userdel. With R, I believe it cleans everything up. So it gets rid of that userdel-R. David's gone now. And so is his home directory. So that's just as a sample there. Everything will get updated to the etc shadow file and etc password file. So if I do password, we can figure out what those users are on my machine. And sometimes you'll see, like, if I just used user add David and I opened up etc password, we'll see David here. But I don't know. Sometimes it creates a David, and sometimes it doesn't. So just sometimes it depends on the Linux distribution. So that's just as a note there. We can also use the super user do or sudo. Some people call it sudo. I like to call it sudo. I think sudo is technically the right way to pronounce it. But it allows us to elevate higher privileges with the command. You do have to be what's known as a sudoer, so sudoers, and that's in etc sudoers, and you use vsudo. So in this case, I believe administrator is in, let's see, administrators. I believe he is in the sudoers on this machine. I don't remember. Let's see. Spelling something. Give me some. Oh, it's not administrators. It's just administrator. So let's say, in this case, let's say I want to open up password. It'll let me do it because I am an administrator on the machine. But if I try to go into root, it won't allow me to. So if I do sudo cd root, it'll ask me how. It'll say, okay, we trust that you've learned that you've gotten this. In this case, it's the password for the administrator. So it's going to be ABC123. It's not the password for root. So in this case, it's allowed me for CD or sudo. Actually, CD may not be something that works with. Yeah, CD is not something that works with sudo cat, maybe sudo cat root temp.txt, maybe. Yeah. So CD is not something we can use with it, but cat is. So in this case, normally we can't view root / temp.txt. It's denied. But if I use sudo, it allows me to. It'll only ask for me at once, every once in a while. I don't remember if either they do it. I know for sure they do it based on login. So the first time that you log in and the first time that you use that sudo, you don't have to use it for a while. So that's just as a note there. And then I can edit it with vsudo. We'll revisit this. Sudo vsudo. We'll revisit this later on what a proper vsudo file or proper sudoers file should look like. Because there's different ways that we can kind of tamper with and do malicious stuff with that as a red teamer. Oh, great. And then we have Linux permissions. So we'll get into this more when we're talking about things from the red teaming perspective. But there's a few different file permissions that we should be aware of. We can read, write, or execute. So reading is generally self-explanatory, but it does it based on a few different settings. So the first one that it'll do it with is the owner. Whoever owns the file, the group that the file owner is a part of, and then also other permissions associated with it. So the other users, anybody else. So if I still had that David user, it would either allow me or disallow me. So So we can kind of play around with this real quick. So I'll exit, I'll go back to my root user. So if I go ahead, I'm going to head to the home directory. I'm going to user add -add David. We'll give him a password again. So if I ls-la, I see my David directory, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a file called, I'm just going to use touch. So touch test.txt. So as we can see here, the permissions on this new file are read and write for root. The group for root is read, and then everybody else could just read. So if I switch back to, if I switch over to David, I see that I can read this file. So if I cat test.txt, it's empty, so that's not unexpected, but it didn't get like a permission denied or something. If I were to try and edit it, it actually, I believe, lets me. Oh no, as we can see here, it says read only. So if I try to say hello, changing a read only file, and in this case, it is read only, so I'm not able to edit it. It does it based on binary. So I can say chmod, and the command is chmod. So chmod adjusts the permissions on the file. So I can add, like, I can allow it to execute. So I've added execution permissions on the file. And in this case, it adds it for everybody. It adds it for the owner, the group, and other users. So let's say I want to do chmod. I want to allow them to write to it. So I'll let people, I spelled that wrong. So chmod attack or w test.txt. As you can see, oh, did I? So in this case, it did not let me add that C. Huh, that's interesting. I'm sure there's something I missed there. I'll have to figure it out. But we can also do this with binary. So if I want to give all of the permissions, so everybody's allowed to read, write, execute, everybody's allowed, every group, every other user, it would just be all ones. So 111, 111, 111, and that is equal to 7. So it is 777. So if I do chmod 777 on test.txt, it has been updated. So if I switch over to David now, it allows me to write to it. So if I do cat, it now says hello world. And if I go back out, I can reverse this. So in this case, it was read write. So read write is 110. So that's a 6. So 6. Then we want them to be able to read it. So typically it's 644 on test. So in this case, now it's back to the original permissions. I can use chown to change the owner of the file. So that's just as a sample there. Again, root has ultimate authority. So let's say that I do chown. I believe, I forget what the order is. Let's try David. Yeah, that's right. We'll do that. And then let's see. So let's switch over to David. So chmod, and let's actually remove all permissions from that file. So as you can see, there are nobody could read, write, or execute it. And I can test that with cat test.txt permission denied. If I go over to my administrator account, it's permission denied. But if I try to look at it with root, I can still read it. So that's just as a quick note there. Again, it kind of shows the importance of root. And if we've set something up and we've used root extensively, as unfortunately we're going to do just to kind of streamline things. But if you're setting everything up with root, that could be a problem. Because if somebody gains access to root, something like that could happen. So the last thing I have is just some suggested practice. So if you liked everything that we were doing today and you want to try it more, of course you can, when you have access to the learning environment, you're able to then do some work, hands-on stuff within the environment there, and you're able to play around with it. But I also recommend using over-the-wire bandit. So this is just a whole bunch of different, they call them levels. It's somewhat of a capture the flag here of kind of escalating difficulty of doing stuff with the command line. So if I were to pull out the way that you go, I've included it in the slides. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the chat real quick. But it'll be there. You'd also just kind of Google it real quick as well. You can go ahead and head on out there. Oops, that's not correct. I added a 3 on the end. Apologies. There you go. That's the right link. This does require to use SSH, and we are going to go over that more on Thursday. But in order to access it, so if I go ahead and pull this up, let me go ahead and find it. Let's see. So here we go. So you have to use SSH. So you'll use SSH. So let's see, level 0. So the goal of this level is for us to log in to the games using SSH. The username is bandit0 and the password is bandit0, and we need to go here. So in this case, we need to figure out how to use SSH. So in this case, they give you the link for the man page for SSH. One important thing is that Bandit over the while uses an abnormal SSH port. Normally it's on 22. In this case, it's bringing us to 2220. So we'll need to figure out how to change the port here. So if you want to very quickly see a few things, we can do this in the learning environment. So if I do SSH bandit0 at, let's see, bandit0 is the username. If I were to just use the host name or the IP address, it would try to use root. It would try to use the user that I'm logged in at. So I need to do bandit0, oops, at, I believe it's, I forget what the extension is. Let's see. It is bandit.labs.overthewire.org. So it is bandit.labs.overthewire.org. Let me double check. It's the wrong site. Labs. Okay, and then it's on port 2220. So I need to do -p 2220. So in this case, it's going to ask you to authenticate. There's a certificate associated with this one as well. So it's asking you, do you trust this one? If you had some sort of, or a hash in this case, if you have some sort of, if you had direct access to it, so if you were doing this internally in your own network, you would have the hash, so you'd be able to 100% confirm. But in this case, most of the time, you're just going to say yes. So if you went ahead and added that to our list of hosts, and here we go. So now it's going to ask us for the password. Bandit0 is the password. And we logged in, and we did it. Hooray. So we did it. I can print where I am. I say, who am I? I know that I'm bandit0. So we've done it. We've made it to 0. And then we can start going through some of the other ones. So I'll go through a few of them real quick. So in this case, the password is stored in a file called readme, located in the home directory. So in this case, we'll be doing ls. So if I do ls, we see readme, and then we can use cat to open it up, readme. And that's the password. Now in this case, unfortunately, I don't have copy and paste access on this one. So actually, I recommend doing this out of your Kali Linux machines. So I actually recommend doing this out of the external Kali machine. So if I were to try this again, so SSH bandit0 at bandit.labs.overthewire.org. It's going to ask me to confirm bandit0, cat out the readme. I can double click here and then it allows me to copy it. So I can go ahead and exit. And in this case, it wants me to just give bandit1. And then if I right click and then paste, it won't show up. So that's one thing. So it's just a heads up. If you're like logging in or doing stuff with passwords in the command line, you won't see like the entered in, which is good, because then you could that make sure that people aren't like looking over your shoulder and looking at your password as you're entering it. So I can go ahead and press enter, and there we go. I've logged in as bandit1. And then we can do just one more level real quick here. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but feel free to ask us. Feel free to ask us in the CyberHawks Discord if you feel like going through this and you want some work. Of course, you can also look up on Google. There's all sorts of tutorials and guides out there on that. how to solve this. So if I go back out to my Kali Linux machine, I believe it's on the right here. So ls-la, it is in this dash. So it's cat dash, let's see. So in this case, the dash is apparently being picked up on as something, and I can actually, I believe, use quotes. Let's see. Let's see, how do we? Aha, this one's actually kind of tripping me up a little bit here. So let's see, cat. Aha, so that's why. I forget exactly what the trick is for dealing with. Let's see. There's a way to tell the command line that, hey, this is not an option here. Let's maybe show all. I could probably do cat star. No. Okay. Either way, so let me actually, I'll show you kind of looking it up. So, let's see. So ls. Oh, let's see. File. Oh, maybe it's a different file. So file. And that's kind of the trick on these is sometimes we'll just look this up real quick. So this is just a quick tutorial on how to look things up on the fly. And sometimes that happens with things like this. It's been a while since I've done over the wire. So let's see, opening using cat to open up a file that starts with dash. There we go. Open up a file that starts with dash. Duplicate. And so this is just something that we would do. Aha, yeah, I thought, okay, so cat dash, and that'll allow you to do it. So that's just as a note there. So that's just a sample there of how we would kind of use some Googling around and trying to figure it out. But that's everything that I have for today. We'll catch up with you in the next session. So the next session, we're going to be doing some networking. So a while earlier on the slides, I showed you the network environment that we'll be working with. Let's see, there we go. We're going to learn how to actually set up this internal network structure. So we're going to figure out how do we assign these IP addresses to each of these individual machines, and how do we get them to access the outside world. And then we'll use that to set up some of our services later on. So I'll stop recording here, and then I'll let the folks on Zoom ask away with some questions.